Okay, so let's go back to the idea that Marx had something to say. Okay, and we could clarify that a little bit. So here's a problem. This is the problem that seems to emerge as the function of some really fundamental force that we don't quite understand. And that's this phenomena that I've been referring to as the Pareto distribution. Okay, so here's the situation. If you look at any creative endeavor that human beings engage in, so that would be an endeavor where there's variability in individual production. It doesn't matter what it is. Here's what happens. People compete to produce whatever that is, and almost everybody produces zero. They lose completely. A small minority are a tiny bit successful, and a hyper minority are insanely successful. And so the Pareto distribution, is the geometric graph representation of that phenomena. And so here's how it manifests itself. If you have 10,000 people, 100 of them have half the money. So the rule is the square root of the number of people under consideration have half of whatever it is that's under consideration. So this works everywhere. So if you took 100 classical composers, 10 of them produce half the music that's played. And then if you take the 10 composers and you take 1,000 of their songs, 30 of those songs, which is the square root of 1,000 roughly speaking, are played 50% of the time. And so there's this underlying natural law, which is, it's expressed as the Matthew principle, which is from a New Testament statement. The statement is, to those who have everything more will be given, and from those who have nothing everything will be taken. It's a vicious statement, but it's actually, here's one of those places where it's actually empirically true. This happens everywhere. And so what Marx observed was that capital tended to accumulate in the hands of fewer and fewer people. And he said that's a flaw of the capitalist system. That's wrong. It's not a flaw of the capitalist system. It is a feature of every single system of production that we know of, no matter who set it up and how it operates. And so then now we have a problem, because what happens is, as soon as you set up a domain of production, and you need to because you need things to be produced, then you instantly produce a competition, and the spoils go disproportionately to a tiny percentage of people. So then well, so what? Well, so the rest of the people starve, or the system becomes unstable because everybody's mad. It's like, that's a big problem. Okay, so how do human beings fix that? Well, the first thing we did was diversify the number of productive games. So you don't get to be NBA basketball star, but you can run a podcast. It's a completely different competitive landscape. So we can fractionate the production landscape, and then people who aren't successful in one domain might be successful in others. That's human creativity. We're really good at that. But the problem with that is you still get a positive correlation among the successful people. So because you're so successful, for example, with your podcast and your YouTube videos, your connection network is insanely powerful, right? So you still have this tendency for what's useful and good to be, distributed, let's call it inequitably. And it's got the power of a physical law. In fact, there are people, they call themselves econophysicists. No one knows that there's a field, econophysicists, econophysics, and they use the same mathematical equations that represent the propagation of gas molecules into a vacuum to describe the manner in which money distributes itself in an economy. Okay, so Marx pointed to a fundamental issue. But he said, well, that's a fault with capitalism. It's like, no, it isn't. It's something way more pernicious than that. And it's something like, well, when one good thing happens to you, it makes you a little more powerful and attractive. And so that fractionally increases the possibility that another good thing will happen to you. And then that spirals out of control, and you get people who have, well, they have all the money, or they have all the podcast downloads. You're in that position. What is it, 1.2 billion? Like, what the hell? But it's to those who have more, and it's not because there's something oppressive about you. It's because you rode the wave of the Pareto distribution, and it threw you way the hell up into the stratosphere. And we don't know what to do about that. Like, should you be sharing your podcast views with the oppressed and downtrodden? I mean, you've got a few billion, you could spread the damn things around. It's not fair that you're the only one that's being listened to. It's the same argument. And it's a compelling argument, because why the hell should you have all that power? If you call it power, you could call it authority or competence. And so we're also being driven into this inequality corner I would say, by the postmodernists and the neo-Marxists, because they say, this is the pernicious thing. They say, well, the reason that some people have more than others is because every hierarchy is based on arbitrary power, and they're all oppressors. And the reason they have the money is because they stole it from you. And there's some truth in that, because there are some criminals. But when you get to the point where you fail to distinguish the productive people from the criminals, which is exactly what happened in the 1920s in the Soviet Union, you better bloody well watch out, because when you radically make things egalitarian, you're going to wipe out all your productive people, and then you're going to starve. And so that's one of the doom end scenarios that awaits us if this idiot process of polarization continues. And what I find reprehensible about the universities, and you're tangled up right up to your neck in this, is that the universities are actively agitating to produce people who believe that all inequality is due to oppression and power. And that's just, well, first of all, it's technically wrong. You asked, Joe, why this has happened in the universities, and like that, I think it's one of these runaway positive feedback processes. You know, the universities start to tilt hard to the left in the 60s, and that just went out of control. And now we're at the point where that's the dominant force. And why is probably another manifestation of one of these Pareto principles. It was like, well, at some point there's enough lefties hired so that the probability that they're only going to hire people equally as left or greater starts to reach 100%. And then you iterate that across a couple of generations and you get no conservatives, which is more or less the situation, say, in the humanities and most of the social sciences. And it sort of looks like a conspiracy, but it doesn't mean that anyone is actually planning it, although there are conscious attempts also to silence conservative voices, let's say. And then that's also driven by this postmodern ethos, neo-Marxist ethos, I would say, that says that all of the right, the moral right, is on the side of the left. You know, and so it's the combination of those two things. There's more things. I often think comically that if you paid sociology professors 3 times as much, the probability that they would be anti-capitalist would decline precipitously. Like, I think a lot of it's driven because there's a lot of smart people in academia, and they're underpaid relative to their intelligence. So, and that doesn't make them happy, so they get bitter and resentful about that, and they think, well, there's these goddamn bankers who are hauling in $20 million a year, and here I am, hardly struggling, but here I am struggling comparatively, and that's the issue, is comparatively on $100,000 a year, $120,000 a year. You know, I look at that and I think, well, whatever, it doesn't matter. But there's like, my colleagues are often angry with me because I do work with the business school. You know, and I also have a business. I'm not anti-capitalist in the least. But it's just dumbfounding to me, because they'll come up to me and say, well, are you so sure that you should be working with the business school? And I think, what bloody planet are you from to posit a question like that? All businessmen are evil. It's like, really? That's the level of your sophistication?